welcome to Really Good Migrations. I'm your host, Bailey Busch, Senior Client Success Manager here at Cordial. I've had the pleasure of working with a ton of our clients over the past years here at Cordial, particularly when it comes to migrations and getting them all set up and migrated over from their old platform to Cordial and getting everything up and running. And I'm happy to introduce my guest today, Mike Nelson from Really Good Emails, founding partner there. Love that site, by the way, because I always reference that when folks are moving over. It's like, I need an example on my welcome series or something. It's like, boom, go to Really Good Emails, punch it in. You got everything that you need there. So super cool to see that.
Thanks, Bailey. I'm glad I could be here with my man crush today. Bailey's awesome. I got introduced to Bailey back in August, September of last year on another migration that we did, and it was awesome. I've done quite a few of these, not as many as Bailey has, but quite a few of these to lots of different ESPs. And so I'm super excited to talk about things to avoid as well as things to think of as you go through this.
Awesome. Yep. And kind of unique here, like we've had the chance to do a migration together a couple of times. And so, yeah, just pulling from both of our experiences on this is pretty fun. So glad to do this with you. Our agenda, quick run through, is we're going to do 5 questions, kind of rapid fire interview. I wanted to get Mike's take on what are the important things you're thinking about when migrating over. We're going to roll into some features, some important things to look for when you're evaluating an ESP. And then strategy and timeline, talking about that obviously comes up in this process. So we'll touch on that. And then we got some online resources for you, some resources to follow up at the end of this. So we'll jump in. We did want to throw it to the audience here just to get everyone's take. A quick question is, how soon do you plan on migrating to a new ESP? So less than 3 months, so I'm looking 3 to 5, 6 to 8, or not until next year, some time off in the future. So curious everybody's take. If you go take a second to punch in one of those answers, and we'll get the results up on the screen here too. Boom. Okay. Most of the folks say in less than 3 months. We've got 50% of the folks that say that. We've got 6 to 8 months is kind of the next category, and then not till next year. So awesome that folks are thinking about that in short order here. So we'll jump into the content because it'll be really pertinent to what you're thinking about here.
Yeah, we got some aggressive migrators here. 3 months. Yeah. Ooh, this is gonna be fun.
Well, let's go. We'll talk timeline. All right, rapid fire interview questions, Mike. Here we go. So some questions. What currently are my biggest pain points? So this comes up when, obviously, right at the beginning, it's part of the impetus of somebody moving. So how do you think about pain points? How do you think about calibrating that in a business? What's been your experience there?
Yeah, and in terms of client work, who I've worked for, businesses, they all have different pain points. Usually the biggest point is, why does it cost so much? Or can we get it cheaper? So that's the one thing that, yeah, as a boss looks at is like, how much am I spending on this? And is it giving me all the bells and whistles that I think I want to get with this? So that's kind of one of the big things. The other one is just how cool it is, I guess. Like, can it do the things you want to do? Can it be the magician so that it makes you look better in the business, but also connect with your clients? So those are some new features they might not have. Maybe there's some clunkiness to your old ESP or the ESP you're on now. Maybe there's some restrictions in terms of how you get your data. There's maybe things with customer support and client relationships. Maybe there's things with templates and the ability to create your own templates, do your own things within your emails that you can't do because you might just have a simple WYSIWYG editor, something like that. So there's lots of things that I can think of off the top of my head that I've dealt with in the past few years.
Yep.
How about you? Anything that you think is like everyone that comes to you because...
Yeah, there's, a lot of people that we're talking to, personalization is super key. They're like, hey, I'm trying to do XYZ. We came across these use cases. We can't personalize the way we want to across our program, and we can't scale that up. We have these aggressive growth goals, and we're trying to personalizations, obviously, in some cases, like a goal for an organization to increase. So that's one of them. Second piece that's important, but not necessarily verbalized all the time, is automation. You touched on that as like doing the magic part of it. So in some cases, there's limitations, or like, let's say we drop somebody into a flow and they've got to go all the way through the flow and you can't kick them out. It's kind of nuances of the old platform feature functionality wise, but being able to automate your program and do personalization in a more automated programmatic way, big driver for a pain point of a business to go looking for another place to send emails.
Definitely. And I know we're going to talk about a lot about that later. So there's a good content there for us to all chat about in about 10 minutes. So get ready, everybody.
Question 2, what matters most to my business right now? And could that change in the future? So this question, like obviously the pain point might be where you start, but then you also need to consider the business requirements and what's important to the business in the moment in the next 3 months that you're going to be making the switch. But then how do you calibrate that going forward? Because obviously the businesses change as you go.
Yeah, I mean, as you grow, you start to think about lifetime value of a customer, LTVs. You might think about also loyalty programs, how that, all the data that goes into that. You might be thinking about events that happen on your website. You might want to think about just setting up your website holistically so that you get a lot more data from those programs, from your app, from those programs, from your retail brick and mortar places, so that everything is going to the same place and all firing correctly. So I think you think about, okay, maybe I do a newsletter today, but what do I want it to be? And that's really kind of built on your business decisions where you want to be in the next 2 to 3 years. But I think a lot of it's going to be around how much you know about this customer, how much can you connect with this customer based on that data.
That's a good point. Integrations is kind of one way I would say that too, is thinking into the future, the different systems that you're going to need to make sure email is connected with, and make sure that the data can play nice across all those is going to be important. Yeah.
And then also the thing is, I think we talked about this earlier, Bailey, but it's the buy-in, like getting buy-in from my manager so that he knows that things are going to change in the future. Yeah. So not what's the status quo currently, and do I have buy-in to make sure that status quo changes or gets bigger or better as we grow as a company?
Yeah, that's a good point, because there's the pain points, and like you can't do these things potentially technically or tactically with the email platform you have today, but there's also the buy-in from everybody else in the organization that are stakeholders that need to be on board with going, okay, that I see why this is important. I see if we change these things, we can increase growth.
Yeah, and your stakeholders might be like, I only care about open rates.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, we need to talk about like click to open rates. We need to talk about revenue per email sent. Like these are some things that you like the business might not care about now, but they'll definitely want to care about in the future. So you want to get down to the details of your messaging and marketing platforms to do that. So last thing on there, but this is supposed to be fire round. Let's go to the next one.
Great. Fire round. Question 3, what is the ideal time to migrate? That comes up all the time. What's your magic answer to that?
Right around Black Friday.
Or maybe not around Black Friday.
I've done there, been there. Bailey was part of that stress. I need to like send you like a nice wine or something still from probably the PTSD that I put upon you. But I guess your ideal time is probably the time that you are the slowest in your business. So it doesn't mean that you're hopefully gonna be slow for a few months, but hopefully there's, a few weeks in there where you know that you can transfer everything over, test things out, and then you'll have ramping up and warming up periods as well on top of that. So things to consider is Q4, if that's your really strong sales season, you might want to go into like Q2. So if you're prepping the next 3 months, but next 3 months are really crazy for you, you probably want to readjust that.
Yeah. I mean, reality is I've done migrations all year round, believe it or not. Sometimes it's industry specific as well. Like if it's publishing, for example, like, and you're not necessarily busy during the main e-commerce holidays, then that puts you at a little bit different of a time scale. But it's a good point. And just looking forward when things are a bit slower for the business is really helpful to make sure that that's kind of a time slot that you could align contracts to and think about when's a good time to do it.
Yep.
All right, rapid question 4. How much bandwidth do you need to be able to do something like this? Like what is the requirements from that perspective? Who needs to be on board?
I think it's also goes back to question number 3 is, do you have the resources in-house to do these things? You're definitely going to need some developer help, most likely, when you do a migration. And so do you have someone on your team that can help with that? Do you want to create new templates? So now that you have this idea of, we're going to go to a new system, why don't we also revamp our welcome series or revamp our transactional emails? And you'll need designers, copywriters, developers all on board to do that. Or you can do the easy route where you just migrate all your data, get everything set up one-to-one, and then you can change it once you're live. That might give you a better perspective on how A/B testing, how your old performance is towards your new performance. There's a lot to think about and then bandwidth with probably contract rates and your manager to make sure things are going on smoothly and everyone gets a nice little gift card for doing the migration, because it's not a fun thing to do in the first. I don't think I've ever been through a really fun migration. I've been through really fast migrations. Bailey made the last one enjoyable, but there's definitely still things that are like, oh, this just takes a while. So
yeah, it's we can make it fun. We can figure out how to make it fun. I think that's more of an attitude that we're going to take towards it. But I'm going to jump to the next question, because this kind of rolls into this, is like, where do I see my email program going in the next 2 years? So there's bandwidth, teams that I need, got to get buy-in from those folks. Then looking forward, what's the roadmap for email look like to an organization? You've been in kind of that position at some other of your past companies. It's like, how you align roadmap and where you want to take messaging. What's your perspective there?
Yeah, I think if you have a good business who has a good head on their shoulders, and they don't think, hey, we're going to grow 600% next year, those are always kind of hard to project. But if you're like, hey, we have a typical growth of 10% or 20%, that's pretty easy to say, okay, this is where my subscriber base should be at that point. Maybe we'll do some things to make it better. Maybe we'll clean up our list and actually have less subscribers. And we've done that, Bailey, where we cleaned out a ton of subscribers that weren't interacting with us when we did the transition. One of the other things is, where will your tech stack and data stack be by that point? And will you have a lot more data to pull through or pull from into your ESP they can make use of? And maybe you don't have that set now, but maybe you're thinking, hey, in a year, I might have access to all this loyalty data, or we might be setting up a new data warehouse for all these click events or category events that I'll have access to. And how will that change my email strategy? And when you go past 2 years, you're probably going to be in the route of renegotiating contracts anyways. And so you really just need to think about 1 to 2 years, 3 years max. Anyone who tries to put you in more than a 3-year contract is probably somebody ESP that is a legacy ESP that's trying to hold on to you. And I'd advise not going that far in advance. Even if they're like, we'll give you like a 30% discount. I don't know. Getting sunk into somebody for 3 years is kind of tough. But 2 years is probably like sweet spot. 1 to 2 years. Think about, where do you guys want to be in terms of that?
Yeah, a couple of things from my experience that's helpful with this is thinking about the campaigns that you want to do. If you're going to break this down to be a bit more tactical, is doing like an ROI analysis and finding out, okay, I have a desire to send all these type of campaigns. I'm not sending them today. Come up with kind of some benchmarks. This can be helpful to work with the ESP you're evaluating on. They should have some good data on this. Come up with some sort of benchmarks that say, great, if I start sending that back in stock campaign or this abandoned cart campaign, these things that I might not be doing today, but I could add if I've got the personalization and automation to do so, what's that going to impact? And then stair step those out from a revenue perspective. And also then that can help inform your timeline. Like you show that to kind of your key stakeholders that want buy-in, they might go, great, shorten that timeline. Let's do it all right now, as fast as you can. But to me, I've seen that work really well, is kind of thinking about how do I take these things in chunks over the next year or two, plan for an email roadmap, tie revenue numbers to it, and then go from there.
Yeah. And one of the other things I want to mention here is, at the end of these 2 years, you're probably going to be light speed ahead of where you are today. And if you get to a point where you're like, shoot, I chose the wrong ESP, that can kind of suck. Like you've built all this stuff into it, and then you're like, oh, now I have to migrate again. Like that's not fun. So you want to think about like, what will get me here, but who also has like the tech chops to continually improve the experience, who's forward thinking. We're going to talk about next gen in this a lot too. So who's improving the platform and really being like a partner with me in this program and making it better, because that's like when you're 2 years down the road and you're thinking, oh, I got another contract coming up, am I going to stay when we go? Like you just went through all that, and then you don't want to redo templates and don't want to transition. So there's a lot of things like putting the effort now to make sure this is the company you want to be with. Even if you do renegotiate, like it still may be beneficial to think about that more, the 2 to 3, 4 years down the road.
Yep. I mean, it is in most cases, it's a longer term decision, especially if you're going to set up a lot of this stuff, particularly from an automation standpoint. So yeah, that's great advice there. It rolls right into a good segue to features. So let's jump to that next. And audience poll question. again, to turn it to the audience here, is what feature in an ESP is most important to you? Mike, how should we think about this?
This is going to be, like, if you're on a stranded island, and which one would you be like, this is the one thing that's going to get me off this island? From a business perspective, all these things are important, but what's going to be the one thing that you're like, oh, that will totally move the needle for me and get me off this island? Is that a good analogy? I don't know.
I love it. Not a literal island, but a figurative business island that's going to get me off to get my growth in. I like the literal island analogy though. Maybe we roll with that. Which one's going to get you off a literal island? It goes
back to the very beginning of the whole thing where we had the palm trees and everything else. We were setting everybody up.
That's right. All right, a few more seconds there. All right, looks like, okay, boom. We've got results in 78% of you are saying real-time audience building and querying for advanced segmentation. That's awesome. And 11% scaling with your business, and then 11% project management, deliverability, solution support. That's awesome. Good kind of take towards like long-term thinking. But yeah, I love the real-time audience building. That's super important. We're going to talk a bit about that as well. So
I would have thought personalization would have had a higher percentage with that group, with everyone talking here. I mean, that's kind of the buzz. Maybe they're already doing it really well and they're just like, I just need to make that super fast. So we'll talk about some of those things too, but interesting.
Awesome. All right. So good, the bad, the good, the ugly. Let's talk about what's hard with like a legacy platform. Like, and first off, like, what is a legacy platform to you? And like, you've used several different ESPs in the past before. And so just to get your take, Mike, on how do you frame this in what's hard with ESP platforms?
Yeah, you say what's hard. I say what sucks. We were talking about this, coming up with some ideas for this webinar. I was like, I just want to get at what sucks. Like, that's the whole reason someone's moving anyways. To me, what sucks is a platform that is really old, that has just been band-aided over and over again. And maybe they purchased some other companies to leapfrog them into, well, we were an email provider, but now we have SMS, but then you have to log into this other text messaging system to do it, and the data is not connected. Or maybe like customer service is just like archaic and you can only reach them at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And actually I just got off the phone with Southwest, I was on the phone for 78 minutes before I talked to them. And that is definitely not a fun experience when you have sent something or you're about to send something and you're like, why can't I just talk to somebody? So having like Slack integrations or something with that team has become very beneficial for me in the past, which I didn't think as like, that's one of the features I want with this team. It just sucked not being able to talk to somebody when I want to talk to them. There's also a lot of things where you might get lots of other features you just don't like. That's a last bullet point, but you might just get like, oh, we have this social media retargeting analysis thing that we add. And you're like, I don't care about that. They're like, well, that's just part of the package. And you're like, well, I don't want to pay. Like, why would I pay for that if I'm not going to use it? So there are sorts of things where you're like, okay, hopefully there's a company that has what I need and I can a la carte it, piecemeal it, or they're just very strategic in what they offer and they don't go into other features that I don't necessarily need. So those are some things that suck, I think. And then there's pricing that sucks sometimes too, where sometimes you're charged for contacts that don't ever get an email sent. So they're just because they're on your list, you get charged for those people. That's something that sucks. I think that's standard across the business, but there's probably some revolution that's going to happen there. So those are some ideas.
Yep. And one thing that sticks out to me, or at least that I feel like I encounter, even sitting on my side, helping clients migrate, is the time that it takes in working in another platform. And it's actually kind of fits well with what the audience had said too, and just real time audience views and segmentation and things. And I'm aware of know the pain of like sitting there waiting for a query to come back for 15 minutes, and you're like, well, this is going to be tough, or that job to export. So just so you can export it and import it again to get some counts can be a hard thing. And so that's why it's seemingly kind of a small thing, but I know like when you're working in a platform that's just like, boom, there's the counts, you're like, is this real life? This is like, and I get jaded. I'm like, they're all supposed to work, right?
I remember when we did the last transition migration, where I wanted something specific to make sure that we're doing something specific with our active subscribers. I don't know if you remember this, Bailey, but I went back to our ESP and I was like, hey, can I get this? And like, yes, you can, but you have to write an SQL query that does this thing. And then you've got to write another SQL query to do this other thing. And then you have to do a VLOOKUP. And that's how you're going to get that information. And I was like, first of all, like, why is this so difficult? So having something like that sucked. But having the data in the system, but not being able to access the data, like totally made me irate, which was a big reason why we migrated in the first place.
Yeah. All right, let's transition to then the good then. So like why are brands switching to, you mentioned this term earlier, next gen. So that's just in terms of like email service providers out there in the market today that have kind of been built post Facebook, Google, YouTube, like all of those, and are built on a little bit different architecture and offer things like real-time data. What are kind of the main selling points there that you saw?
I mean, all these bullet points ring true to me. Being able to activate with your data and bring those data sources in from other places. You know, if you look at the legacy stuff, they'll just be like, here's your list and this is what they do. This is what they open. Maybe they can get you more granular, like what the individual actually clicked on, but they don't give you like what they purchased usually. They don't give you what they're browsing. And so a lot of these next gen are going to be going towards customer data profiling or CDPs and allowing you to just kind of see the data holistically for an individual and being the messaging or marketing engine for that customer. So we talk about ESPs. I think that's like, we talked about this the other day, but ESP is kind of just going to become an old term, I think, because being just focused on email is not the thing of the future. You want text messaging, you want probably some social connections there, and we'll talk about those. But so marketing platform or marketing service provider might be the MSP. But yeah, with the brands, with good things here, you're going to want flexibility. I think that's kind of the big thing is being able to get into the data, do things you want to do with data, trigger and make automations and personalization off that, but then make sure the data is like real time. So somebody made a purchase, or I don't know, sorry, I could talk on forever this, but one of the things like I keep thinking about is I constantly make purchases of, let's say, like, I don't know, protein drinks, and I'm like a chocolate protein drinker. And then tomorrow I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try out their new strawberry drink. And I go look at it, but right like an hour later, I get this promotion for chocolate. And I'd be like, I was just looking at the strawberry. Why don't you guys know that I was looking at strawberry? As you can tell, I work out all the time with this sweet dad bod, but personalization and real-time data is like really important in this next phase of what consumers expect.
Yeah. And being like you said, being able to act on it in more real time and making sure that that's all there within the platform and not having to kind of download it, import it, all that stuff. So
yeah, so you're gonna have to speed me up, Bailey. I think I'm gonna talk too much through this thing. So let's move on to the next one.
So I want to break this down then too, because not all next gen platforms are kind of the same. There is a variety of platforms that exist out there today, but wanted to kind of provide like what are some key things that we should talk about? What are some things we should ask a next gen ESP about? So I can offer a perspective on this that largely I love starting here. This is always ground zero whenever we're starting a migration, is what does your data look like? And data, you should have a platform that should be able to ingest everything about your customer attributes, things that list that they're on, geolocations, like store various types of data about a contact or a customer within the platform. You should be able to see all of that as well. Then there's events. So events is also a really important part, is to be able to have events streaming in from like a website, understand what people are doing in real time on the site. And then business data. So this is everything from like a product catalog if you're e-commerce, to say an article catalog or various kind of categorizations of the different products that you sell, kind of the metadata that goes into powering a lot of the personalization as well. So these three to me represent a foundation that's super important to make sure that the platform that you're looking at can support all of these things.
They're all going to be working together in some way. So you need to make sure that it's almost standardized, that your email address or the customer profile is the unique identifier across all these other things. And then I think that business data is really important when you think about catalogs, what you can recommend. So not just like what this person's done, but what this person can do. And how do we get them based, like look-like modeling or other ways to get them into segments that are similar to others, so we can recommend some really cool things based on the business needs. And that's all going to pull from customer historical data, what they've been doing on the site, and then how we introduce new categories, new products, new articles, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and that rolls into this slide that we had here that we were talking about, which is the how do you activate on that? Like you've got this data in the platform now. You should be able to activate it on it in a variety of ways. So what are all the different places that you're allowed to, I would say, see that data? Everybody mentioned here real-time querying. Like how much of that data do they allow you to query? Like are they allowing you to query kind of like, if it's a complex data structure, can you just query one level down, or are you able to target various kind of custom properties that you're able to put into and append to this data to be able to get way more granular? And is that real time, or does that take time to process that so you can get that? How many of those processes are you allowed to run? Like sometimes there's nuances where you'll be looking at a next gen marketing platform. Let's use that, and they're like, yeah, we do all that stuff. You can activate on this, you can personalize, you can build audiences on it, but then you get into the nitty gritty and you're like, well, I just pumped in all this data and spent some time building a data foundation, but I can't actually access that kind of deeper level, or I can only access one event inside of a message, or I'm only allowed to trigger off of certain things and not everything. So how about audience building? Like when you think of that and like using this data, how did that shift for you when you jumped over to a new platform?
Yeah, a lot of things that go into this, especially when you're pulling in event data. So we use Segment IO with a lot of our properties. And so there's a lot of things that are tied to that individual based on the event conversions that you set up on your site. But essentially you use that with where they are in their certain journeys. And you say, cool, they've looked at category X so many times. We can set some rules around that. We can push them into a different segment. We can do things based on geolocation. If they move, we can move them automatically. We don't have to physically move that person based on like their IP address or whatever. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with the audience building in that sense. And then the growth side of it, where it's like referral based, like people that have done XYZ, you can find similar similar customers like them and get them towards your more business goals and build your audience that way and figure out like, okay, cool, let's export this list of whatever this is and then import that into like Facebook, and you do some demographics and do some lookalike modeling off of just those individuals based on all the data that we've already captured and be pulled into this one data source.
Yeah, that's solid. I'm going to keep moving on here in building on this. Like we've got the data, we've got the ability to build audiences and personalize on it and then activate on it. And the next kind of phase of that is like, where can you reach out to your customers about that? You touched on it before, but the different channels that you want to be able to send this data to would be, we reach them on SMS, MMS, reach them on a mobile app if you have that, to be able to send down a push notification or in-app, and then I'll send these things over to social and be able to target folks over there and kind of connect in with the other aspect. Maybe it's the email team, but maybe there's this other marketing arm that's focused on more paid stuff that can be helpful to leverage sending that data out to.
Yeah, and I being the guy who's the co-founder of a site called Really Good Emails, like SMS plays a big part into just your overall strategy, especially if you're retail. Maybe not so much if you're like a publisher, maybe it can be, but that's one of the things that I've just opened my eyes the last 3 years on, is how much more lift you can get by having a really targeted strategy there with using both SMS and email. And then mobile, like it's a no-brainer if somebody's using the app and they don't get straight to that last frame that you want them to, or that last page that you want them to, and they went back somewhere, you can hit them with a little message within that saying like, oh yeah, if you buy now, we'll give you 15% off. Like that's on the promotion side of it. But then the other one, it could just be a little nudge like, oh, did you know that you were, just a step away of getting XYZ. APIs, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Like you want your data to go wherever you want. Like you want to know maybe which subscribers are opening them and pushing that data back into other places. Like this is a really active subscriber. Let's make sure that from a mobile perspective or similar perspective that we aren't over sending them messages. We're not texting them on a huge frequency, because we know that email's their channel. So there's lots of things that can connect dots with their audience there too.
Yeah, API is kind of an interesting one too. It's like from Cordial's perspective, we think about sending an API call outbound, like if you're going to integrate with a direct mail partner, or at the same time, like make sure the next gen platform has a robust set of APIs to be able to pull this data about sending on all these channels out of the platform, or be able to interact and programmatically send some of these via API as well. So there's kind of two parts of how you interact via API that can be really, really impactful to a business.
That good direct mailer just gives me all the feels when I open up my mailbox, my physical mailbox. Like, oh, they got this right. I mean, it's not good for the environment. Maybe there's ways they're offsetting. I'm always like so impressed. I'm like, oh, they totally saw that I didn't check out and that I didn't care about that follow-up email, but now they totally have my attention.
But now they've got something in my hands. And this, to comment on the channels as well, like another interesting thing here, looking at just kind of the average marketer, is they work with 5 different messaging platforms. So that'd be kind of represented by like your promotional, maybe you send promotional email on one platform, you send transactional email on another platform, and you send triggered emails on another one. That's like 3 platforms, 3 contracts, 3 different points of contact and support for sending email. And this is the same thing kind of for push notifications for SMS and for other channels that you can send on. So most next gen platform, particularly Cordial in this scenario, this diagram here shows that you're sending all of these things within one channel, which is nice because it's cohesively using all the same data. So that wraps things all together real time. Like, did I just send to somebody on a mobile app and then I'm going to send them an email? Being able to have that insight and awareness in real time is super impactful.
Yeah, and as a manager, consolidating as much as I can is better from a perspective. I mean, you can save on contracts. You've got contracts that are expiring at different times. Maybe as they expire, you just say, cool, I'm just going to use that part of the ESP now and just apply it because you're probably paying for it already. And so there's things that you can save money on by going by consolidation format here in terms of, and there's just less sales guys you have to work with. So
another key point in choosing and kind of evaluating a vendor is your ESP, your marketing platform should be a partner. So we think of this is particularly my view of the world here, but as a client success manager, I have access to a variety of different teams on my side that all represent what Cordial is, but we're here to partner with your team directly. And that's kind of representative in Mike and I's relationship here, how we just kind of, boom, instantly come into their team, help them throughout the whole process from a migration standpoint, down to us integrating with Slack and being able to talk directly, sharing pictures of the weekend and all the fun stuff that goes along with it. And like, hey, how can I do this thing in the platform? But it's really cool when you can actually have a good relationship with somebody and answer things in real time. It's extremely helpful from my perspective. I'm curious your take, Mike.
Yeah, I don't know if you've caught this throughout the last 40 minutes on this call, but being sold by one person, being passed off by an onboarding person who has no idea what your business is like, and then being pushed off to various random people when you have questions who don't have any information on who you are becomes very tedious, because then they have to go look at other tickets. They have to go look at your customer history. And that doesn't say that like reps aren't going to change, but having somebody that's a little bit more dedicated to who you are and your own goals and are aligning with how to grow, that incentive is there for them, because they know that you're going to stick with the ESP, right? So they're like, hey, we want you to be successful, because if you are, you're going to stay with us. And having that kind of set up from the get-go. So if I was in your studios and you're migrating somewhere else, and this is what I do, is I want to talk to the rep that's going to be my rep the whole time. I want to know how they think. I want to know how good they are at developing, how good they are at coding, what their design chops are, what the resources they can give me, how fast they are to respond. And I test all those things out, because you're going to be with this person at least for another 2 years, or this company for another 2 years. And so you want to have somebody in your pocket that you can rely on.
Yep, that's great. Great point. Yeah, we definitely pride ourselves on being part of your team. So we're pumped on that. Timeline. So moving right along, this is an important part in all evaluations, and something that's definitely not lost in the evaluation process. But here's an example timeline of kind of evaluation, onboarding, implementation, thinking through like marking out on a calendar your holiday code freeze. That'll definitely have an impact, of course. We go, oh, oops, we started migration and now we've got holiday code freeze we've got to contend with, which can happen. But this is just to kind of lay it out as an example. This obviously changes and depends a bit on the size of your mailing list that you need to warm up, the complexity of your program that needs to be brought over, but definitely would encourage folks to think about this. If your list is anywhere near the size of like 1 million contacts, that you're sending to on a regular basis, like think about the migration and implementation kind of warm up period lasting for somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks on average. That's helpful to just have a site. That means you're up and mailing. Now the trick here is like Mike, even with what we've done, is like we got up and sending messages like very quickly. Messages are going out the door. There's still the ramp period, and then thinking through the other side of your contract as that winds down, as that kind of like comes into play as well.
Yeah.
You've been through that. So how do you balance between two contracts, setting all this stuff up, the work that comes between, and getting the emails out on a regular basis?
I mean, it all depends on a lot. There's a lot of things it depends on. One of them is your contract end date. So if you have like the leeway where like I can just walk away from my current ESP to migrate and have time, and that contract's still going to be going on, that's awesome. But most people are like, hey, our contract's due and ended in like in the next 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. We need to give them notice probably within 90 days. So you have like that 3-month period. That's like when the fire starts and you're like, shoot, can I get all this done in 3 months? If you know that a contract's coming up, at least the next 6 months, please start looking at this now, because it just sucks. As you start like untangling the spaghetti bowl that you probably try to create with your legacy ESP, and then you have like, oh, well, I have data over here in my app, and I've got data, and how my site is like 10 years old, and I've got these form fields that are being pushed through an API through this other thing, and you have to start like using some investigation work to be like, all right, we gotta fix this. Or you just go the method of like, we're just gonna migrate, and what breaks, and we'll fix it later. Done that before. It's not like the best experience, but if you are on a crunch time and you know that you're going to be kicked off your ESP, or you don't want to be at that ESP, that you just make consolations. You're like, cool, we just need to migrate everyone over and get ramped up before we go. But holiday time is possible. Like Bailey proved that we could do it, and we didn't lack in open rates or inbox placement or anything like that. But again, we were very strategic on who we ramped up and how we ramped up and how long it took, making sure that the most active subscribers were hit first. So there's definitely a different kind of strategy when you are in a time crunch than if you have some extra time. Please give yourself extra time. Every time I don't give myself extra time, I always regret it. And so.
Yeah, it's good wisdom there. Definitely. Time is always helpful. This is another one that's important, and you had experience doing this, jumping platform to platform. So like training and support, what's your comments on learning curves and picking up a new platform?
Yeah, I mean, if you go from something that's based on like SQL queries to just like an export, you're like, oh, finally, I don't have to do all this other stuff now. So you can save some time doing things, but there are also aspects of the new platform where you're going to think, where is this at? Where's this saved at? How do I access this data? You're pinging Bailey or somebody else like, I know I saw this somewhere during training or onboarding, but I don't remember where it was. Those are the things that are a little bit more obscure that you don't access all the time. But then there's also learning curves on language or coding if the new SP does something wildly different. So if you're used to like a WYSIWYG editor and you go to something a little bit more complex, then I would think, okay, I've got to bake in some time to learn how to code dynamically here. Like, do I use open brackets? Do I use squiggly lines? Do I use all these other things? And how do I use if-then statements to get in this personalization? There's definitely a learning curve when it comes to personalization if you're not familiar with that and you're trying to get that. But those are all things you can learn and make, iterations on over and over and over again over the months. And like really good emails, we're still working on some of those things, and we've been up and running on a new SP for a long time. So there's still lots of adjustments to make in as you learn more.
Yep. And I mean, just to emphasize it again, like us going over Slack is like way helpful in reducing that learning curve. In my experience, that's just not only with you, but all the other clients I work with. But that support's also a big one. And that comes up oftentimes when we're talking with new clients that are coming on board. It's like, hey, their view of the world is I have to submit a support ticket and I'm gonna have to wait. And it takes 3 days for me to hear back. And like, how am I going to do this and factor this into migration as well? And that's a different perspective. And so it kind of depends on the support model and how that's set up with when you're evaluating and talking to other ESPs, is like, how quickly are you expecting turnaround and questions to be answered? And what does that team look like? And is that, maybe they're like, we're on Slack, we're doing all this stuff, but that only exists for a
The
month.
person you're going to, yeah.
Yeah, a month. And then like you said, like sometimes you're moved to another team and then you got to learn and relearn, like they have to relearn you and you have to relearn this other team and how everybody works and kind of the factor that in. So definitely take a look at that, because that will help kind of align on timelines and what you can expect going forward.
Yeah, and the support team from the ESP that you're moving from definitely doesn't bend over backwards to get you what you need if they know that you're not going to renew that contract. So, if that, I've dealt with that multiple times where it's like, yeah, just get in the queue. And you're like, oh, I just need like this really simple thing, like just get in the queue. So you have to bake that into your timing as your support team, kind of like your past support team is willing to get you the information you need to make the migration.
Good point. Yep. All right, audience poll question 3. Turn it back to you. On a scale of 1 to 5, how excited are you to migrate?
I think we probably scared them off a little.
I think, 5, extremely excited to migrate.
I love that we use the term excited on this. Like it can be fun. Like you'll get in there and be like, oh, look at all this cool bells and whistles I got now. And like, this is what I can make. This is all the new designs that it makes me think about. And oh, if I use, this journey mapping or automation series, I can grow this way. I think that's the kind of excitement that we're looking for, is not I have to really like download all this information and put into a CSV and upload. Like that's not exciting. The exciting stuff's like, oh, sorry, I'm just like giving bias to everyone's answers. But what do we have? What do we have here?
Here we go. A little bit excited. A little bit excited. We moved the needle. We moved the needle here. That's good. Awesome. And all right. So looking ahead here, just as a quick recap, we've got some resources coming your way. So we'll be sending out an email which will have Forrester Wave in it, which is an independent analyst report that they've gone through and kind of looked at a bunch of ESPs all across the market. So that you'll see legacy and next gen outlined on that. But that's just a helpful resource to kind of see where various vendors place and how an outside independent firm has kind of analyze that. We've got a couple of guides, so like how to choose an ESP you love, as well as we recently did a 3-part series on LinkedIn from kind of another resource, Brian Rance at Cordial here. So that's out on LinkedIn. You can go find that. And then if you do want to speak to us, we're always here to help. And so reach out afterwards and we'll be able to connect with you. We did have one question that we got some time here for quick Q&A. So a question was, what's meant by the ramp up period and warming up the IP and ramping and moving over automations and triggers and journeys and stuff? So that's a good question that I will jump back to in the slides here. And this is speaking towards this here. So when we're talking about deliverability, we'll designate a warm up period, which is going to be the first 2 weeks of you sending new messages. So that's a pretty critical time, especially when you're sending on a new IP and new sending domain, because that particular period is where we're sending the first messages to Gmail, to AOL, to the rest. And so we need to send really controlled low volumes is the best. Warm that up. Say, hey, we are about to send you some messages. Basically, it's that warm up period. The ramp up period is going to be more tailored to the engagement that you have within your audience. And so that's going to be, we typically build a custom ramp plan. We did that with Mike, where we evaluate the engagement of the audience. We then decide that there's certain amounts we could go faster at Gmail. We need to go a little slower at Microsoft. We're going to go kind of average at Verizon Media Group, and we will space that out and then ramp all of those domains kind of independently. And that's speaking to kind of how we were able to ramp up in a fairly condensed time period, but very strategically to make sure that we're hitting a good reputation in stride there. So that was a question, great question there. Once you're up and sending, then you're kind of like ongoing triggers and the others and automation journeys. It can be done either way. You could start with those, or you can, more commonly, we see that we do everything we need to do, get sending. And then after we've been sending for about 2 weeks through the warm-up period, we start layering on the automations and journeys on top of that. So that's kind of the typical cadence of how that works.
You'll probably get assigned a promotional and a transactional IP address, so that from a promotional, like your newsletter, ads, whatever, will go out of one. And that will have usually a little bit longer from a warm-up period, because you're You don't know how well your open rate's going to be. You don't know how well people are going to click on things. Your transactional, pretty much like everyone's going to open that. They're going to be like, oh yeah, I just bought something. Here's my receipt. And that can go way fast. I don't actually even remember a warm up period for our transactional, Bailey. And we had pretty high volumes. I mean, you probably did it, but it was nothing that we really needed to worry about.
It's pretty much right out of the gate on transactional because there's such high engagement, just like you were saying.
Yep. Yeah. So, but yeah, the other ramp up stuff is, on the engagement is cool. Let's not really change anything that we've been doing. Let's just see how things work. And then you can go and like A/B test things later after you've already kind of established your ramp up, because you've set a baseline and then now you've got a way to go more and get better, click to open rates or figure out who's clicking on things. So I wouldn't worry about really changing like an A/B testing period during your ramp up. I probably would advise against it, but yeah, those are things to consider.
Yep. We've got 2 more questions. This is a good one. Mike, I want to ask you this is what would you recommend? Would you recommend migrating your existing HTML or building new templates?
This depends on, you're most likely going to have to build new templates, especially if you're going to these like modular components. So if you're going like block style, which allows you to do a lot of personalization based on what's inside that block, and you can like if then statements, so you can omit that block if that person's doesn't fit the criteria to get what's inside that block. You'll probably need to rewrite it anyways, especially if your new ESP does not have the same coding language. So Bailey, obviously Smarty is what Cordial uses, which is a little different than what I was used to, and there are some learning curves to figure out, double brackets and if then statements and all that kind of stuff. But once you get it down and you get into how to build a component, you go from like this, instead of building a whole email, you just build out these like individual blocks, and then you can drag and drop those blocks as you see fit, and you can update blocks and change them colors or whatever in the future. You can build them so that you can have a WYSIWYG to go with it, so that you develop the block and then you hand it off to somebody else and they're like, okay, I'm just going to type in the text here and it'll automatically push it into the block. There's a term for that. Bailey, what's that called?
Just updating the block, I think.
Yeah, update the block. When you're ramping up, you can just be like 1-to-1. This is the HTML, throw it over. Here we go. Like, this is what we had. And then we started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do with this? The whole reason you moved is to make it more personal, to bring in that real-time data. And most likely your old ESP doesn't have that, or it's written a different way. So you're going to have to rewrite it. And that's where you get into the knowledge base. That's where support's really helpful, because you ping them and say like, hey, I've got gift card numbers I want to decrement. How do I do that? That was a question I had with Bailey from one of the ones that we did. We have coupon codes that we want to decrement. How do we set up a table so that we're eliminating the coupon code as it gets pulled into a new email? There are other things for personalization. So yeah, you'll definitely have some HTML to do or block building to do.
Yeah, most people, I would say from my experience, most people like to rebuild a template because it's a good excuse to like get that work done that you don't otherwise have time to prioritize. So it's kind of a natural place for it to fit. And then it also depends on how much personalization is in it. So like you were saying, Mike, if there's not too much personalization, no, it's easy to like bring it straight over just as regular HTML if you can get access to it in your other platform, and then start sending there. So yeah, good question. Question 3 is what advice would you give to someone who may not necessarily have internal resources to help with migration? And when would an agency be appropriate to help support that? Great question. I've worked with a handful of clients that have done it either way, that they're doing it all in-house internal, or we've kind of coupled where there's the brand and then there is an agency that's brought in that handles migration. I would say the most important part, if you're going to bring in an agency to do it, well, one, there's a cost component to consider there. And so that's going to vary depending on your business and what you have to be able to kind of spend on that. But if you're going to bring in an agency, it's ideal if that agency also has access to your other platform and knows your other platform. I'd say it's less optimal if you've just hired an agency outside. They've never worked with your incumbent ESP or your existing new ESP. That I wouldn't recommend, because you've just offloaded with money to say, I'll pay you guys to just learn both platforms and struggle through trying to figure out how to extract stuff over here and then get it all set up here. So definitely make sure that they've worked with your old platform and can have access, can go get the data, can help you in moving the data over. That's one of the bigger parts. So that's where I would say it's helpful to have an agency that can do that. And then it's totally possible to have a really successful migration using an agency, but I've just seen it both ways.
Yeah, I'm gonna raise my hand to say, I did the last migration all by myself, and I'm not
There you go.
super technical. I'm more on the business side of things and strategy than I am on the actually jumping into the data. And I was able to find how to get all the data I needed from my incumbent ESP. And then we were packaging that up. We gave it to Bailey's team. We uploaded it there. They were able to figure out what the ramp ups were based on of just the engagement that we could pull out of the old ESP. Again, we were using more of those like bigger legacy ones where they say they have more bells and whistles. So we could grab that if you're going from like maybe a MailChimp or a Campaign Monitor, not just like throwing anyone under the bus. But when you export those customers, they're not going to come with like, how engaged is this individual? And so they probably have to roll out some more filters and figure that out with like some pivot tables, which is not that difficult if you know anything about Excel. So.
Cool. Yeah. And I'd go back to this slide too, kind of what you said. You did that with basically just support from us at Cordial here in the team. So between deliverability, between solutions, between myself, we were able to help you through the migration. So it does depend a bit on the services and what the services that an ESP can offer that can help maybe move the needle. If you are just a team of one or two, like you said, Mike, there's like, it's oftentimes that the email marketing teams are pretty small and nimble. So you're not alone there. That is a common thing where you could be a team of one, team of two, but you could pair with an ESP that's got these services to help you, and you can have a very successful migration.
Would I have hired somebody to do it? Yes. Would I have afforded it? No.
Yeah.
So if you have the luxury of hiring somebody, and go for it, like that's probably the easiest way and less stressful way of doing it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all the questions. Thanks for joining in with us, answering the poll questions, listening to our silly jokes. We appreciate you joining us for really good migrations, and you'll get the recap of this later.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
later.